For more, we have Niall Stanage. He joins us now from Washington. He's a White House columnist at The Hill. Okay, Niall, we heard the president talk there about Roe v. Wade. Whoever the president picks at this point, how do you see the confirmation process playing out from more of a political perspective?
From a political perspective, Rena, clearly whoever the president picks will be strongly opposed by the Democratic Party. The problem for Democrats is that they don't have the numbers on their own to thwart this nomination. Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, has suggested that his party will press on promptly, that the confirmation could even be completed by the fall. So that's the general backdrop, but clearly this is going to be a battle royale between not just the politicians in each party, but the activists in each camp as well.
You know, now another major issue for this confirmation fight is obviously hanging over it, the Mueller probe. We know that there's at least one potential nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, who's written that the presidents should not be encumbered by investigations of any kind. Do you get a sense that that's even a factor in this?
I don't think it's necessarily a factor for President Trump, but if Mr. Kavanaugh did get the nomination, then I think that would clearly be something that Democrats would draw attention to. As with so many things during the Trump era, Rena, we're in a very unique situation here. Clearly, this Supreme Court justice could have a role to play in adjudicating things like whether an indictment can be brought against a sitting president, whether a president has the power to pardon himself. That is very deep water, both legally and politically, but that's where we're sailing right now.
I want to also ask you about changes potentially at the White House. There's been talk that the president's chief of staff, John Kelly, may be on his way out. What have you heard about that?
My reporting suggests that that could be quite imminent. Even people who have not previously been so sceptical or critical of John Kelly have been telling me that they think the end may be near for his tenure. And of course, Mr. Kelly himself had said he was basically planning to stay a year, which is almost up. In terms of potential successors, the two names we hear most often are Mick Mulvaney, the budget director, and Nick Ayers, who's currently chief of staff for the vice president, Mike Pence.
I want to also ask you, for the first time in a while, we heard from President Barack Obama. He was, in fact, addressing a crowd in D.C., a fundraising event for the DNC in Beverly Hills. Do you think that President Obama's presence will actually help Democrats? It didn't always translate during his presidential years.
Yeah, I mean, you make a fair point, which is that a lot of Barack Obama's popularity was personal, and therefore he couldn't really pass it on to his party in midterm elections. Nevertheless, he is a very magnetic figure. I think even his opponents and critics would acknowledge he's an uncommonly gifted orator. He clearly has the capacity to inspire the Democratic Party and the Democratic grassroots. So, you know, if I were a Democrat, I'd much prefer having him on my side than various other leading members of the party.
Yeah, and you know what, Niall, I want to actually turn to North Korea for a second. It's been 2 weeks since that summit between the president and the North Korean leader. Since then, the president said that North Korea is no longer a nuclear threat, but we now know there's evidence that there's actually increasing production. And he said that the remains of U.S. soldiers who were killed in Korea have actually come home. We know that's not true. What do we know about the current state of these negotiations? Where do they stand?
Well, I think the key point here really is the gap between what President Trump has claimed and what appears to be reality. He was suggesting that that summit with Kim Jong-un had solved the nuclear problem. These new satellite images that we're getting out of North Korea would suggest that that is not the case, that in fact the regime there could be trying to bolster its nuclear power. So that's a clear problem, and I think that will clearly hang over any further negotiations between the US and North Korea.
Do you think now with those new satellite images that somehow the White House might change their tune on their approach towards Kim Jong-un?
It's certainly possible. I mean, President Trump could consider that a betrayal of trust or evidence that he had been misled in his initial talks. So it could harden the White House's line potentially. But as we all know, Rena, predicting exactly how this White House will react specifically in relation to North Korea has proven a bit of a fool's errand in the past.
That is well said. Now we will leave it at that with North Korea. But before you go, I want to ask you, this weekend rallies across the country against President Trump's family separation policy. Do you get a sense that immigration is going to help or hurt him going into midterms? And how will it affect the Democrats? Is it really a rallying cry to get people out and vote during midterms?
Immigration writ large, I think, can help one party or another depending on the demographics of particular districts. But the issue about which people are protesting today, I think that does hurt the Republican Party to some extent. That seems to be one of these issues that we see sometimes in politics, Rena, that really has an emotional resonance beyond a regular news story. I think the very visceral idea of separating children from their parents does hit home with people. I think that reaches, frankly, people who are not following every twist and turn in Washington, but who have an understandable aversion to that kind of treatment.
Yeah, and despite the hot weather, lots of folks gathering out to make a stand on this issue. Niall Stanage, thank you very much for joining us, Niall.
Thanks, Rena.